This question is from video one of our students, and it reads, Close procurements involves closing contracts with each vendor and archiving the lessons learned register. If this is done in the monitoring and controlling phase, then just deliverables and acceptances and sign-offs are carried out in the closing phase. I wonder what was the reason for this. Close procurements seems to fit in closing phase logically than monitoring and controlling. That is a very good question. But bear in mind, video, there are a number of things here that contradict the PMBOK guide. First of all, monitoring and controlling is not a phase. It's a process group. In other words, it's just a bucket to categorize processes. It should by no way be used as a timeline or sequential idea of how processes flow. Processes do not necessarily flow from initiating strictly through planning next, strictly through executing next, strictly through monitoring and controlling and closing. No, process groups are just that, categories. So something could be done in monitoring and controlling, but it could be the last thing on the project sequentially, or one of the last things on the project. A few things to think about, video. Let's go to the PMBOK guide, and I want you to open up yours. And let's go to page 499. I want you to read closed procurements there. It says, the buyer, that's you, usually through its authorized procurement administrator, provides the seller with formal written notice that the contract has been completed. Requirements for formal procurement closure are usually defined in the terms and conditions of the contract and are included in the procurement management plan. Typically, all deliverables should have been provided on time and meet technical and quality requirements. There should be no outstanding claims or invoices, and all final payments should have been made. The project management team should have approved all deliverables when? At closure? No. Prior to closure. That's the mindset. Prior to closure, we want to make sure that we've got all of these deliverables inspected, approved, and done and dusted. It's as simple as that. So being in monitoring and controlling does not invalidate anything. It's just a bucket. It's just a category. Throwing it into monitoring and controlling is no different from throwing it anywhere else. The bottom line that I want you to focus on for your PMP exam is, what am I doing? Which process am I doing it in? Closed procurements, as you can see here on page 499, is clearly done in control procurements. No deliberation for your exam. You get what I'm saying? Now, this topic is revisited as a catch-all in close project or phase. This topic, if you follow me to page 125, can be further expanded upon. Now, I don't like splitting hairs when it comes to the PMBOK guide, but it is a very fair question just to give you some context as to what exactly you should be doing in close project or phase. By the time you get to close project or phase, closed procurements should exist. Okay? Now remember, close project is not the same as close phase. So you could have multiple iterations of close phase where you are closing out a phase, but not necessarily closing out a project. And imagine if you had 20 different contractors working on 5 different phases in different amounts. You could have several closed procurements, and you'll have one grand close of the entire project in closed project. But in closed phase, you did that so many times. You get what I'm saying? So it's important that we don't get hung up on this minutia for your exam, but you do need to know if PMI says this is from this process, take it as the gospel truth and just stick to it. But to clarify, I want you to look at procurement documentation on page 125. It says, to close the contract, all procurement documentation is collected, meaning it already exists, indexed and filed. Information on contract schedule, scope, quality and cost performance, along with all contract change documentation, payment records and inspection results are categorized as built plans, drawings, or as developed documents, manuals. Troubleshooting and other technical documentation should be considered as part of the procurement document when closing. It didn't say a phase, it said a project. This information can be used for lessons learned information and as a basis for evaluating contractors for future contracts. So by the time you get to closing, you already know how the contractor performed. You've got all of those records of scope and quality and cost, schedule, everything, and you know how the seller performed. And that is going to become one of the assets downstream to help you section out those who you should call back and those who you shouldn't. Okay? Now, if we go a little bit further into closed project or phase, on page 123, there are a few items of interest from the world of procurement to help you solidify your understanding. Let's take a look at some of these. The second major bullet states, activities related to the completion of the contractual agreements applicable to the project or project phase, such as confirming the formal acceptance of the seller's work. Did you see the word confirming? This is a confirmation. This is not where you do it. This is where you confirm it. Finalizing open claims, if any, updating records to reflect final results, and archiving such information for future use. So you're not closing out a contract here. You're not closing out a procurement. That has been done. You're confirming. You're dotting your I's, crossing those T's, making sure everything was done as intended. And if not, it's an opportunity, project manager, for you to get back on track and for you to do what should be done. Now, to close this out once and for all real good, I want you to go to 12.3.3.7 on page 501. What does it say here? Organizational process assets updates. OPAs that can be updated as a result of control procurements include payment schedules and requests, seller performance evaluation documentation, that's straightforward, pre-qualified sellers list update. So if a seller is not qualified based on their horrendous performance, you're going to update the list. Some sellers who may have been previously qualified may suddenly be removed from the list. It says these lists will be updated according to the procurement control process outcomes because sellers could be disqualified and removed from the list based on poor performance. And then we have lessons learned repository. It says lessons learned should be archived in the lessons learned repository to improve procurement on future projects. At the end of a contract, the actual results of the procurement are compared with the projected results in the original procurement management plan, and these lessons learned state whether the objectives were achieved, and if not, provides the reasons they were not. So your closing statement regarding the lessons learned, it's just business as usual. Closing out each procurement, making sure they are still on the seller's list or not on the pre-qualified seller's list, and putting all this stuff in the OPA updates. It's just business as usual. But it is not done in closed project or phase. If it was done, if being the word, was done at the right time in control procurement. And I know from these questions video that you are going to do awesome on the PMP exam because you are mining into the detail. A lot of people don't, but I can usually tell from student questions how deep they are thinking. Thinking deep is definitely one of the things I want you to do. And Vidya was one of our students on this course. Beyond any shadow of a doubt, I am looking forward to her acing the PMP exam. The July 1st exam, the pilot exam, like I said, the PMI say this is 42%. So really quick, we're going to talk about managing conflict. And as you manage conflict as a project manager, you want to know the source. You want to be able to interpret where the problem is coming from. You want to be able to analyze the context for the conflict.